Hey, Annie. All right. So, nephews and niece up in Alaska. This is my second recording about my brother. And, the last one I said was my first video, and it was probably my favorite memory of my brother. And then I thought of this story and I realized, okay, maybe this probably competes with that one because I was a bit more involved in this one. So here's the story. So we lived out in that cabin up in Alaska, and Andy and I didn't have a lot of toys to play with. Our toys were axes and knives, throwing axes and throwing knives, and I mean we didn't really have toys. But anyway, we both had BB guns, and Andy had a handgun that, like, if you aimed it up in the air, it might have gone 18 feet. It was a weak handgun. It looked pretty cool, but it was a weak BB gun. And I had a Daisy pump action. And the more you pumped it, the harder it came out. And it could hurt a person. It could probably kill a bird. Anyway, one time Andy wanted to, or not just one time, I guess we did this more than once, but one time I remember is what we would do sometimes. We had 5 acres of land. So that was the boundaries of our play area that we would, we knew our boundaries. And so that would be the end. So we got this one time, we got back to back. I had my BB gun, he had his BB gun, and we each took 10 steps out and then just disappeared in the woods. And the idea was we were hunting each other. Well, he probably understood that he was pretty safe because I was pretty much deathly afraid of him. And so it's not like I was actually going to shoot him with this BB gun, but it was something to do and broke up the day or whatever. And so anyway, we disappeared into the woods. And Andy, oh my gosh, he is so good in the woods. He always was so good in the woods. He was like stealth mode out in the woods. And so it was tough to hunt Andy in the woods because he was so good. But I had this genius idea that I got up on top of our cabin. I went up the ladder and we just had this 1-room cabin kind of thing. But I got up on that cabin. I pumped it 10 times, which is pretty much as you could pump it. And I got in a position with the barrel pointing at where I thought he would probably come through eventually. Well, I'm thinking I was there at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. It may have only been 20 minutes, but it felt like forever because I knew I couldn't move. I couldn't even roll my eyeballs left or right because he was so good in the woods that if you rolled your eyeballs, he'd see wherever he was, he could see the movement. And I knew that about him. So I was just perfectly still, couldn't move at all. And I just waited and waited. It had to have been an hour. Anyway, sure enough, eventually, peripheral vision, I see him approaching the path that I was sure he's having to go through. And so I didn't move my eyeballs because he'd have seen me. I just waited and I waited. And sure enough, he gets up behind the tree. He looks around. He gets around the tree. He does his moves. He's probably 14 years old here. And he finally realizes he's in the clear. So he comes out in the opening and he walks right underneath in front of the cabin, right by where I'm at. And he's starting to walk away. And I'm following him with my BB gun. And my brain is thinking, hey, he's the one that wanted to play this stupid game. I didn't want to play this game. He's the one that wanted to play this. And I got the perfect shot. And what am I going to do? So this is, I think, one of only 2 times where I physically ever hurt my brother. but his back was in my sight. And I'm like, okay, here goes. And I pulled the trigger. he oh my gosh, it hit him right in the middle of his shoulder blades, and his arms went, and he screamed, his arms threw back, and then he whipped around, and he saw me up there, and you ever hear about like a deer, frozen with his heads in the headlights, eyes in the headlights? That was me. I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And this is a great example of how Andy understood psychological warfare and torture. I mean, it was horrible. He locked eyes with me and never took his eyeballs off my eyeballs. And he didn't run or move fast. He slowly, eyeball to eyeball, slowly walked towards the ladder. And we were eyeball to eyeball contact until we were out of eyeball to eyeball contact because he was up next to the house. And I looked over and the top of the ladder is going boo, 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 as he's coming up the ladder. And I'm like, oh, now I had jumped off the roof of this cabin several times, but I couldn't jump off because I was scared to death. And and as soon as his eyeballs reached the top of the roof, locked his eyes on my eyes, and then he just kept his eyeballs on mine. He came to the top. When he got to the top of the ladder and stepped onto the roof of the cabin, without looking, because his eyeballs are right on my eyeballs, without looking, the back of his foot went to the ladder and he kicked it behind him. So the ladder fell away from the cabin. Now there was no escape. I mean, it was just psychological torture. And then he slowly walks over. And by this time, if this is the corner of the cabin, I'm like of the roof of the cabin. I'm right on the corner, just cowering. I'm scared to death of what he's going to do to me, and I'm literally afraid. This wasn't play afraid. I was afraid. And he walks over, eyeball to eyeball, staring at me the whole time, not smiling or nothing. He walks over, takes his time to position himself, just like settles his feet right. This is why I wish I was up there personally, because this story is so much more fun if I'm able to tell the story to a live audience. But anyway, he positions his feet so he's totally blocking my path. So here's the roof of the cabin. I'm right here. His feet are here. He's just right there. And then eyeball to eyeball, never takes his eyeballs off me. Right? He's just staring at me the whole time. He very slowly, everything was so methodical. He takes his gun, and his BB gun, you would unscrew the top, and that's how you would load it. Without taking his eyeballs off me, he just unscrews the top of his BB gun, takes the thing out, puts it underneath his arm, reaches into his pocket, doesn't take his eyeballs off me once, reaches into his pocket, pulls out his package of BBs, fills up his BB gun with BBs, just pours it up, eyeball to eyeball the whole time. Fills it all up, taps it, fills a little bit more, taps it, takes his, puts the thing back on, screws the thing back on. Then he repositions himself, aims the gun down at me, and like from maybe 18 inches or a foot, I mean, right on top of me, he just unloads his whole gun. Boom, 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 boom. It was like I was on there going, ooh, ee, ooh. And like I said, his gun had no power. So it's not like it actually hurt. But the psychology of it, he was a master of that sort of stuff. And you guys probably growing up with him have some experience of that, and maybe not the fun side of it. Like, I guess hearing the story, you might think that was fun. I didn't think it was fun at all, but I lived through it, and that was a good thing. And I don't know that we ever played that particular game again. And by the way, side note, epilogue, whatever you call it, his back for weeks, he had this big welt. I mean, I think the BB that I shot went through his clothes and lodged into his skin. My BB gun was powerful, and he had this huge red welt on his back for weeks after that. But anyway, that was the gunfight story. All right,